Welcome to the presentation on considerations for a single IRB model, sponsored and created by the University of Utah. I'm Ann Johnson, the IRB Associate Director at the University of Utah.
And I'm Sarah Mumford, an IRB Operations Manager at the University of Utah. This presentation has been created to help provide education to investigators, study teams, and research administrators on the concept of a single IRB model in multi-site research. This presentation is available to the public for use in education and training on this topic. We hope that it will provide you with the insight in moving forward with a single IRB model at your institution.
This video is part one of a two-part series. Part one includes overall information about using a single IRB model, which is applicable to the majority of research institutions pursuing this approach. Part two is a video that specifically addresses the requirements and methods for using the University of Utah as a single IRB. If you are using another IRB as your single IRB, please consult with that IRB for their requirements and methods. The purpose of this presentation is to cover three key objectives. First, to describe the single IRB model. Second, to describe the Human Research Protection Program. And third, to describe the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders involved in the single IRB model. The basis for the single IRB model is to allow multiple institutions that are conducting the same protocol to use a single IRB for review, instead of using multiple IRBs to review the research at the sites individually. The single IRB model has been in use for many years across a wide variety of studies and circumstances. According to the new NIH policy on single IRB review, the goal of the single IRB review model is to enhance and streamline the IRB review process in the context of multi-site research so that research can proceed as effectively and expeditiously as possible. The Department of Health and Human Services also comments on the goal of the single IRB review model by saying, "We agree with commenters who speculated that mandated single IRB review would ultimately decrease administrative burdens and inefficiencies for investigators and institutions, while acknowledging that the transition to this model would require significant time and an adjustment to institutional structures and policies. While single IRB review may help to streamline the study initiation process, it is important to understand all of the components of the single IRB model that must be completed beyond just the IRB review. Efficient performance of all stages of study initiation and conduct will help to ensure multi-site research is effective and expeditious." New NIH policy was released requiring all multi-site, domestic, non-exempt research to use a single IRB in order to receive funding from the NIH. This new policy goes into effect for all awarded grant applications received on or after September 25, 2017. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and 15 other federal departments and agencies have issued final revisions to the federal policy for the protection of human subjects, also known as the Common Rule. These revisions include requirements for use of a single IRB in domestic cooperative research effective January 20th, 2020. A single IRB may be chosen for an individual study, or a network may choose one IRB to act as the single IRB for all of their studies. According to these new rules, the IRB chosen to act as the single IRB can be selected in a few ways. First, the lead or primary research institution can select their institution's IRB as the single IRB. Second, a study sponsor or research network can select the single IRB. Third, a study may have special requirements or considerations that warrant using an IRB with a specialty or experience with that type of research. There may be other factors that are considered when selecting a single IRB. However, in all cases, an IRB always has the discretion to choose whether to perform this role. The NIH policy and Common Rule outlines circumstances where a single IRB model is not required for multi-site research. First, if the research is categorized as exempt under the Common Rule. Exempt research requires little to no IRB review or consideration. Thus, it is not considered effective or efficient to implement the single IRB model with exempt studies. Second, there may be studies that have specific population-based concerns that a single IRB model will be unable to address. Some population-based concerns are better addressed at the local level, given that local IRBs have a more intimate knowledge of the populations in their area. Sponsors, investigators, and institutions should work together to decide whether a local IRB model is more appropriate. Third, there may be laws that do not allow for the single IRB model to be used at certain sites. In the state of Utah, this particularly applies to tribal laws when conducting research with Native American populations. Other states also have laws that require local IRB review in certain situations. Sponsors, investigators, and institutions should work together to identify these situations. Fourth, according to NIH policy, there are certain funding types and awards that are not required to utilize the single IRB model for multi-site research. This includes career development, research training, and fellowship awards. And fifth, NIH policy also indicates that multi-site research is not required to use the single IRB model when a study involves more than one site, but the sites have different roles in carrying out the research. The NIH policy includes allowances for the costs of single IRB review. Institutions may continue to use indirect costs to fund their site-specific costs for IRB review, as they have been in the past. However, institutions can now charge for additional costs related to single IRB review. This should be a consideration when preparing the budget for NIH grants. The NIH has provided guidance on scenarios to illustrate the use of direct and indirect costs for single IRB review. This guidance should be considered in full when an institution determines their cost strategy.
It is key to understand how the single IRB model fits into the overall goal and infrastructure for protecting human subjects. The next section of this presentation will discuss the concept of the Human Research Protection Program. Research institutions across the United States have human research protection programs, referred to further in this presentation with the acronym HRPP, to protect human subjects who enroll in research. Though HRPPs may differ at each research institution, HRPPs generally include the following components: IRB review, HIPAA privacy review conducted by a privacy office or privacy board, financial conflict of interest review and management, training research personnel and ensuring that research personnel have appropriate qualifications for performing the research, other reviews that are ancillary to IRB review, such as scientific review committees, safety review committees, and resource review committees, and review to ensure all state laws and institutional requirements are met. When considering a single IRB model, it is important to recognize that although the IRB review component may be outsourced to an IRB outside of the research institution, the institution remains responsible for ensuring that all other components are completed prior to initiating a research project. It is important for researchers to understand the clear distinction between the IRB requirements and the rest of the HRPP. HRPPs at local institutions are best positioned to provide a single IRB with the information it needs to make decisions about the research being performed at their institution and in their community. It is important that HRPPs take this role seriously and that single IRBs recognize the value in the knowledge held at the HRPP and utilize the HRPP components effectively when using the single IRB model. We will now discuss the different components of the HRPP in more detail. A major role of the HIPAA privacy rule is to ensure that patients' personal health information, or PHI, is protected and used appropriately according to the law. The Privacy Office oversees protection and use of PHI in the clinical setting and in research, providing resources and education to the research community. The Privacy Office also investigates information breaches, including those that are associated with human subject research. A privacy board is a unit that makes HIPAA determinations specifically for human subject research. This includes confirmation of HIPAA authorization language, waiver of authorization determinations, and use of limited datasets and de-identified datasets. While some privacy offices also perform the responsibilities of a privacy board, at some institutions, the IRB has been given this authority and responsibility. HRPPs are responsible for identifying and managing financial conflicts of interest in research and scholarly activities, procurement, and intellectual property. Often, there is a Conflict of Interest Committee who is responsible for this review. The Conflict of Interest Committee is considered a subcommittee to the IRB and provides the IRB with recommendations and management plans that will improve the protection of human subjects. According to federal policies, all investigators and study staff involved in the design, conduct, and reporting of research must disclose their potential financial conflicts. HRPPs must provide pertinent information about conflict of interest review and management to any IRB that will be considering research conducted at that institution. HRPPs are responsible for ensuring that those conducting research at their institution are trained and qualified to conduct the research they propose. This training might include human subject training, such as CITI, good clinical practice training, and other relevant research training. Each institution's HRPP is responsible for ensuring the training requirements for their own institution have been met. HRPPs evaluate CVs and resumes to verify that investigators and study staff have the appropriate education, certifications, and skills to perform the study procedures and provide appropriate research oversight. HRPPs are also responsible for ensuring that the institution and its investigators have the resources necessary to conduct research in a valid and compliant manner. HRPPs also may have ancillary review committees that specialize in a certain area related to scientific evaluation, safety evaluation, and evaluation for the use of facilities or resources. These ancillary reviews may include a radiation safety committee, the institutional biosafety committee, specific department-level reviews, as well as facilities and resource review for the use of tissue and data repositories, nursing resources, and pharmacy services. Each site may have additional reviews that are necessary to ensure that the institution is well equipped to conduct the research at its site. Lastly, the HRPP is responsible for ensuring that research is conducted according to state laws and institutional requirements. The HRPP also ensures that consent language specific to the institution is appropriate, such as HIPAA authorization language, research-related injury language, and person-to-contact language. However, there may be other laws and requirements that the HRPP must pay attention to that go beyond the consent language. For example, state laws can differ in the use of a legally authorized representative and who can act as a legally authorized representative. Specific state law also governs policies on emancipation of minors. These requirements often differ from other states. The HRPP must ensure that the IRB and investigators are aware of their applicable state laws and that they are followed.
The next section of this presentation discusses the roles and responsibilities that are connected to use of the Single IRB model. This includes the role of HRPPs, as has just been discussed, but also ties in other stakeholders who are part of the Single IRB review process and the conduct of research. There are 4 key stakeholders involved in the Single IRB model. First, the Single IRB. Second, the relying site HRPP. Third, the lead study team, and fourth, the participating study team. Each one of these stakeholders has a role to perform when using the Single IRB model. It is important to note that in the majority of cases, the lead study team's home institution will be responsible for providing Single IRB review. However, there are circumstances where a lead study team will use a Single IRB that is outside of their institution. For example, the lead study team may be conducting the study as part of a research network or consortium, and the network has designated a specific Single IRB for all studies conducted within the network. The roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder are always the same, regardless of the IRB that is selected to be the Single IRB. There are also 4 key stages for using the Single IRB model. This includes protocol and consent development, the Single IRB reliance decision, the initial review, and ongoing review and oversight. Each stakeholder will have responsibilities within each stage. We will now talk about each stage and the responsibilities that need to be performed. Stage 1 is protocol and consent development. As with any study, the protocol must be developed and finalized. This is primarily the responsibility of the lead study team, although the participating study teams may also provide input as part of a collaborative effort. When using a Single IRB model, it is important to ensure that the protocol includes a detailed recruitment plan, consent process, and data and safety monitoring plan. These details will not only help the Single IRB to have complete information for their review, but will also ensure that the relying site, HRPP, has enough information to determine if the study meets local requirements. The participating study teams may need to provide information about their local requirements, such that the protocol can address the needs at each site. It is also valuable for the lead study team to develop a consent document that can be used for the study. Each participating study team may need to make minor changes to the consent document to accommodate local consent language requirements. So generally, the Single IRB will approve a consent document version for each participating site. Stage 2 is the Single IRB reliance decision. The Single IRB and the relying site HRPP are responsible for working together to come to a decision about relying on the Single IRB for any given study. This decision must be documented in writing via a reliance agreement. The reliance agreement outlines the obligations and responsibilities of both parties. Stage 3 is the initial review. This includes initial Single IRB review, as well as the initial review performed by the relying HRPP. Each stakeholder has responsibilities during this stage. The lead study team is responsible for making the submission to the Single IRB on behalf of all sites. The lead study team may prepare the Single IRB application themselves, or may contract with another group, such as a clinical trials office or a contract research organization, to prepare the submission. Additionally, the lead study team becomes the primary liaison for communication between the Single IRB and the participating study teams. When the lead site prepares the IRB application, it can be done using one of two models. Some IRBs may not offer the option of either model, so it is recommended that you determine your IRB's requirements before beginning the application. The first model is one where the IRB application is initially completed with the lead site, as well as including some or all of the participating sites. Additional sites can always be added later via an amendment or modification, but other sites would be included in the initial application. The benefits of this model is that once the IRB application has been approved, all sites included on the initial application are ready to begin the research together at the same time. Under the second model, the initial IRB application is completed with only the lead site included. This allows for the IRB to review and approve the study protocol, the primary consent document, and the overall research plan. This model also allows for all of the participating sites to ensure that they have all of the necessary documentation with their HRPP prepared for the IRB application. Once the initial IRB application has been approved, each site can be added via amendment once all of their documentation has been completed and a reliance agreement is in place. The benefit of this model is that once the research has been approved, it is more of an administrative amendment to add each site. Additionally, delays at a single site will not hold up approval at other sites. Remember, it is important to confirm with the IRB you are using if they offer the option of either model or if submissions are required in a certain manner. You will also want to consider what works best for your specific project or specific sites. During the initial review stage, the participating study teams are responsible for completing all of the non-IRB requirements at their local institution. These are the relying HRPP requirements which were mentioned earlier in this presentation. The participating study team is also responsible for communicating necessary information to the lead study team so that the lead study team can evaluate the information and determine whether it should be submitted to the Single IRB for review. This could include site-specific differences in the recruitment or consent process, or other information that could affect IRB approval at that site. During the initial review stage, the relying HRPP must ensure that the study can be appropriately conducted at their site. The relying HRPP must also help to ensure that the Single IRB has all of the necessary information about the site so that the IRB approval of that site can be given. First, the relying HRPP must ensure that the participating study team meets all local requirements. Next, the relying HRPP must provide the Single IRB with any applicable local context for the site, including site-specific consent and authorization language. Next, the relying HRPP must evaluate the participating study team's financial conflicts of interest, training, and qualifications. If there are any concerns identified during this evaluation, the relying HRPP must provide the Single IRB with any information that would influence the IRB review. And finally, the relying HRPP is responsible for tracking the study according to institutional requirements. The last piece of the initial review stage is completed by the Single IRB, who is responsible for IRB review and approval. The Single IRB must review and approve studies according to applicable regulations and policies. In order to do this for all of the participating sites, the Single IRB will consider and address the information that has been provided by the participating study teams and the relying HRPPs. Many Single IRBs will also act as a privacy board for HIPAA determinations, such that the relying HRPP does not need to fulfill this role. This is a role that will be defined in the reliance agreement. The Single IRB must communicate with the lead study team about IRB-related decisions and determinations that are part of the initial review. Stage 4 is the ongoing review and oversight. This includes continuing review, amendments, and reporting of problems and events. This includes audits, compliance, and safety monitoring as well. The lead study team is responsible for much of this oversight, ensuring that the required submissions to the Single IRB occur on behalf of the entire study, while also ensuring the study is monitored appropriately. The lead study team remains the primary liaison for communication between the participating study teams and the Single IRB, and must have a clear communication plan in place. The participating study teams have similar responsibilities during Stage 4. They remain responsible for managing all of the non-IRB HRPP requirements at their institution throughout the course of the study, and they must maintain adequate and clear communication with the lead study team to ensure that they have all Single IRB approvals that they need and that the Single IRB receives all relevant information about problems and events during the study. This is likely to include site-specific amendments to the protocol or consent document, changes that result from ongoing review by the relying HRPP, such as changes of conflict of interest management plans, and local problems and events. The relying HRPP also has ongoing review and oversight responsibilities during Stage 4. The relying HRPP continues to work with the participating study team to review and meet local requirements outside of IRB review. If any changes or concerns are identified through the relying HRPP's review, the Single IRB must be notified to determine if changes are needed to the protocol or consent documents. The relying HRPP also continues to perform compliance monitoring of the research according to their institutional policies. Though the relying HRPP is not required to make IRB determinations regarding problems, events, and noncompliance, they may need to provide valuable assistance to help resolve these concerns. The relying HRPP and the Single IRB will maintain communication such that they can both assist the participating study team in resolving and preventing future problems. It is important that all of these stakeholders work together to create solutions that are in the best interest of the research participants. During Stage 4, the Single IRB continues to perform all of the standard IRB functions for review and approval of the research as it progresses. The Single IRB may work with the relying HRPP to perform compliance monitoring and will continue to have open communication with each institution to ensure research is performed.
There are key questions you will need to answer if you are preparing to be the lead study team of a multi-site study. First, what are the terms and conditions of the reliance agreement between institutions? The Single IRB will be negotiating the reliance agreements with the participating sites' IRBs, but as the lead site, you will need to be aware that the process is happening. You may need to help provide requested information, and there may be specific pieces to that agreement that you will need to be aware of, particularly when it comes to communication amongst sites. Second, what are our responsibilities as the lead study team and/or local study team? You will need to consider what your role is. You are the lead site, so you are managing this multi-site study, but you may or may not be an actual participating site. So if you are also going to actually be participating as a site in this study, you are going to have to do the same things as all of the other sites in addition to your management type responsibilities. Third, how do ancillary committee reviews get completed at each institution? All institutions have ancillary committees and handle the process differently. Ancillary committees may include conflict of interest, radiation safety, facility reviews, etc. As the lead site, you are going to need to find out what ancillary committee reviews are required at your participating sites and be familiar with the order in which these things need to be completed before the site can be activated to begin research. Fourth, how do we handle problems that occur at our site or any of the participating sites? As part of your protocol planning, you will need to develop a communication plan. How will it be reported to the IRB or to other sites if an adverse event occurs at a site? Who needs to know about deviations? Depending on the terms of the reliance agreement, relying institution IRBs may require different reporting of adverse events and deviations. Their definitions of what needs to be reported may be different, and their timelines may be different. But you will always be required to report to your single IRB following their policies. In all cases, you will be reporting to the single IRB, and individual sites may have additional reporting requirements to their home HRPP. Fifth, what local context concerns, state laws, institutional policies apply to this protocol? How do we communicate these to the relying sites? How do we confirm these local requirements are met? State laws differ in research requirements. Each site might have unique needs as it applies to the consent form or recruitment. You are going to need to consider these things as part of your protocol planning. You are also going to need to develop a plan for how you are going to confirm that these things get implemented. Sixth, how do we track this protocol as a research project happening at our institution? What is the process for disseminating approval letters and approval documents? Each IRB uses a different system for tracking and dissemination of information. You will need to make sure you understand the IRB system and its capabilities. Ultimately, the lead site is responsible for making sure that each site has been distributed all IRB approved materials relating to their site. So you will need to consider this and how you will accomplish this as you are developing any standard operating procedures or policies for your project. Finally, what information will be required at continuing review? How will this be gathered from relying sites? As part of your protocol and site planning before you begin, you will want to make sure that your sites are on board and understand what information is going to need to be collected at continuing review, and everyone will need a timeline to make sure that that information is ready before the study expires. You will need to consider the capabilities of your single IRB system and how you will design your operating procedures and policies for collecting this information and providing it to the IRB. It is the lead site's responsibility for collection of the required information and submission to the IRB. Additionally, as the lead site, you need to be aware of what is happening at your participating sites throughout the year. When you are a participating site, you also have a number of questions to consider before the study begins. How do I interact with the SIRB? What is the communication plan? What does the SIRB expect of me? You are used to working with your own institution's IRB. You know them, you know how to communicate with them, and you know their policies. You're now going to be working with a totally new IRB, and you will need to find out how to do that. Are you going to communicate anything directly to the SIRB? Or do you communicate with the lead site study team? What are the policies of the SIRB, and where can you find them? What requirements does my institution have that are not covered by SIRB review? How do I continue to meet those requirements? Once a reliance agreement has been negotiated between your HRPP and the single IRB, you will need to understand those terms and understand what additional requirements you still have to do there and how you will do them. Earlier in this presentation, we talked about the components of the HRPP. Do policies of the SIRB differ from policies of my local HRPP and institution? How do I adhere to both sets of policies? As part of the information you are collecting about the SIRB and their policies and what other requirements you still have at your local institution, you will need to make sure that you understand where there are differences and have a plan for adhering to both. If you have any questions or feedback about this presentation, please feel free to contact the University of Utah IRB using the contact information provided.
For those who need additional information about using the University of Utah as a single IRB, please proceed to the separate video for Part 2. Thank you for joining us.